Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and get started, everyone. We'll probably have some more participants join us for tonight. I know it's after work hours, so we may have a couple folks trickling in, but we've had over 100 participants sign up for this evening. So thank you for signing up and joining us. And we are super excited to kick things off. My name is Catherine Covino from the class of 2012. And thank you for joining us tonight for Political Campaigns 101, Running for Office in Virginia. Myself, along with the DC Alumni Chapter and the Alumni Association, are so thankful for our moderator and our panelists for joining us tonight. Some of our panelists are literally dialing in from their campaign trails, so we so appreciate the time they've taken this evening to spend with us. And I want to thank our panelists, Jay Jones, as well as our mutual friend, Zara Stasi, for really spearheading the ideas behind tonight's event and all the prep work that everyone's put in for tonight. So if we could move to the next slide, please, I will just go over some administrative housekeeping before we kick it off. Everyone is muted, as you've probably realized, aside from our panelists. So you can see us, but we cannot see you currently. So if you have questions this evening, on the bottom of your Zoom, there is a chat button and you can type in your questions to me. You can type them into all of the panelists. Will kind of go over how the event will go, but we will be utilizing questions directly from you in the chat. And for everyone's awareness, the event will be recorded. So hopefully that is okay with all of our participants. So now I'd like to turn things over to our moderator tonight, Will Payne from the class of 2001. Will was previously on the annual giving board, and he's currently the vice rector of William & Mary and a member of the Board of Visitors, and he's joining us today from Bristol, Virginia. So Will, thank you for joining us, and I will turn it to you.
Thank you, Catherine, and thanks to the Washington, D.C. Alumni Chapter, as well as Tim Von Stead and Ashley Dustin and the William & Mary Alumni Association for hosting tonight's event. Let me first introduce our panelists and then discuss format. So alphabetically, Jay Jones is a member of the class of 2010, has served in the Virginia House of Delegates since 2018. He represents the 89th district, entirely included in the city of Norfolk, his hometown. Jay comes from a long line of public service, which I hope he'll discuss tonight. And this is an especially exciting time for Jay as he took the plunge in the statewide office and is on the ballot for the Office of Attorney General. Next up, Caleb Rogers graduated in 2020. He's almost 1 year into his first term as a member of the Williamsburg City Council, having been elected 3 days after commencement. All 4 years as a student, he was involved in local government and a number of capacities on campus as a student leader. Caleb is the third William & Mary student to be elected to council after Scott Foster in 2010, and another one of our panelists I'll introduce in a minute. Next up, Brianna Sewell is a member of the class of 2012. She was born and raised in Prince William County and is running for the open House of Delegates seat in her hometown, located in Northern Virginia's 51st district. She's endorsed by all the heavy hitters. Brianna has served in a number of roles in public service and is quite familiar with navigating challenging issues facing local, state, and federal government. Finally, Benny Zhang, like Caleb, but before Caleb, was elected to the Williamsburg City Council in the final days of his senior year in 2016, becoming the first Asian American and youngest member elected to the council in its history. While serving on council, he graduated from William & Mary's Marshall Wyss School of Law in 2020. Benny chose an early retirement from politics after his first term, but I'm sure we haven't heard the last of him. 1 week ago, Benny and his wife, Kelsey, became first-time parents. So we welcome beautiful baby Evelyn Joy to the world, class of 2043. Congratulations, Benny. Okay, ground rules. I'm going to break protocol and keep this informal. So for our panelists, we're going to stick with first names. This should be a conversation. So for the panelists, don't hesitate to interject and build on one another and interrupt me. For the next 90 minutes, I'll have a series of open and direct questions, and we'll break those up with some rapid fire William and Mary related questions. And for those, don't think, just speak, and I'll call on you, and we'll also take questions from those watching at home. So as Catherine said, please submit your questions, and Catherine will jump in from time to time and ask those questions on your behalf. We'll get right into it. I'll begin with our first rapid fire question. Coin toss. This goes to Jay. What is your favorite spot on campus and why?
My favorite spot on campus was the porch at College Deli.
That's a good answer. Benny.
Jay is so much cooler than I am. I liked Morton Hall. Some late nights with some good friends and members of the rugby team. Some good memories there.
All right, Brianna.
I would have to say sitting on the steps of the Sunken Garden.
Good answer. And Caleb.
I think mine, Will, is right behind your left ear right now in that windowsill of the Blue Room. It's wide enough where you can sit and read a good book. And obviously the Wren building has so much history.
All right. Good answer on that one. So let's go into kind of this is a question I think applies to everybody. I have a couple questions on public service. I think we'll start there and then move into some William and Mary public service type questions. But the first, and maybe I'll ask Caleb first. How would you say your time at William and Mary, your experience at William and Mary, prepared you for public service?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of ways I'd say. One, William Mary really prides itself in being a liberal arts school. So the idea of that and forcing their students to take some academic courses that are across disciplines, with the idea being that they will then go out into the workforce trying to solve problems that are across disciplines. I think that leads well towards a life of public service, whether they're in a career role or an elected position, because that's exactly what you're trying to do. And the second, more broadly maybe, is Williamsburg itself. Very old city. We have an amazing tourist attraction being Colonial Williamsburg right there, respecting the history of our area. And then we also have a research university, which has its own histories of William and Mary, but one that is trying to grow and trying to be a university for the 21st century. So respecting the old and trying to be innovative towards the new is, of course, always something that elected officials should make sure that they are working towards. And I think that phrased a lot of what I was trying to do at William and Mary and in the role.
Excellent. And Jay, I think you could probably offer some perspective as well.
Yeah, Williamsburg was great. And I think used my time at William and Mary to sort of get involved. And it really taught me about myself and about what kind of leader that I could be. But really working in a team. I was an orientation area director my senior year, and working with my fellow OADs really sort of taught you about how to manage a project. And I think when you then transition into a campaign, you're really like the principal of a small business. And so you're working with people, you're managing people, you're working towards a common goal. And so, the activities that I got into, I think really prepared me for that. But then I think, like Caleb said, you're imbued with a sense of history because of how old William and Mary is and how rich it is in, the past. And then you sort of take that when you get out and you sort of, look to the future and say, how can I apply those lessons that I learned once I get out of here? And so I think all of the people on this panel, I think have done that and have done it very, very well. But I think we're all sort of, fortified by what we saw, the people we got to know, and the sort of environment that William and Mary has created for a long, long time.
And Brianna, same question to you, but also your perspective. You're in an area that has, I think, the largest concentration of William and Mary alumni, and maybe there's a spin on that. But how did your experience at William and Mary, help you get to this point, and not only your previous service, but now running for office?
Absolutely. I would have to say the fact that the campus is set up literally at the doorstep of Colonial Williamsburg, and the fact that it really is an open campus. So I think we're always taught to learn outside of the classroom, and those were really the experiences that I took away. from my experience at the college. It was the idea that inside the classroom, I felt like my paradigm was constantly challenged. But more importantly, that I could continue the conversations and have the chance for that interdisciplinary study outside of the classroom with my colleagues, whether they were classmates or professors. And I feel like that really helps lead into that network and the desire to like create these lasting relationships and really see what we can evolve and create and establish together outside of our college experience.
Excellent. Thank you. And Benny, why don't you close us out?
Absolutely. Well, I'll offer 3 points. One, I was a Sharp Community Scholar. So shout out to Monica Griffin, giving me at least exposure to working with members of the community and getting to know Williamsburg better. Second, I was a self-designed Asian American Studies major. And Jay had mentioned this, but my major helped me understand more about myself, my Asian American roots, and could not be probably even more significant, what we're seeing today. And then third is the citizen lawyer ideal from William and Mary Law School. I really do believe in it. And when I retired early from politics and looked for a law firm that provided that kind of transformational leadership that's steeped with citizen involvement, that's something that early on from my 1L year, I pledged to continue to always engage in some sort of or fashion of public service. And those 3 things, I think, really encapsulates how much William and Mary has prepared me for public service.
Yeah, thank you. I think still on this topic, but more personal, who has been your, and we'll start with Brianna, who has been your biggest inspiration or role model in public service or inspiring you to run and serve?
I would actually probably say Jackson Sasser. He was a professor that I had for a constitutional law course. And I signed up for it on a whim, but it came more from the deeply embedded opportunity that I had through the Multicultural Affairs Office at the college. At that time, it was known as the Multicultural Affairs Office. I think they since have changed the name. But it was more of a conversation on challenging norms. And it was, again, going back to the conversations that had nothing to do with the assignment in the classroom, but more about getting to know each other as individuals and understanding why we both ended up at William and Mary. And it started off with a friendly joke about Alabama football, because our families are both from there. And it really led into a deeper conversation of challenging those norms and stereotypes around race relations and social stratification that led me to like where I am now and the desire to come back and be of service to my hometown.
Great answer. And Caleb, maybe turn it over to you next.
Good thing. I'll first say, Brianna, I hope we can connect sometime about Alabama football. I was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama, so we have plenty to say about the Auburn and Alabama rivalry there. So 2 William Mary related people I think had an influence. The first was spring semester of freshman year class, states and localities, with Professor John McGlennon, also Supervisor John McGlennon of the James City County Board of Supervisors. This was a really fascinating way to look academically about what goes into local government and then to actually learn from a practitioner. So that was fascinating to me as an 18-year-old taking the class. And my second, and this is a serious answer, not just because he's a predecessor of mine and now one of my constituents, but Mr. Zhang, Benny, watching you for 4 years in the role balancing law school, balancing your marrying Kelsey and now becoming a father was really inspiring. I guess it was inspiring because I think I saw a fantastic city servant, but I also can't imagine all that was going through your head before you decided to actually run and when you were campaigning and knocking on those hundreds, if not thousands of doors. So Benny and John McGlennon are my 2.
Right. Benny, turn it over to you.
Well, I don't know what John will think about that, but Caleb, that was truly heartening. Thank you. And Kelsey and I send our love to you, even though we're probably within 0.9 square miles away from each other, just across the city. It's a great question. There are 2 folks that come into my mind. Caleb, I'll have to return the favor. You're also one of my role models. This guy ran in the middle of a global pandemic. And just like Brianna and Jay are doing right now, but this was on the outset. And for those who don't know, or maybe tuning in, as you can imagine, the student population is a huge voting bloc in Williamsburg. So when students weren't returning, Caleb took it upon himself to campaign, keep pushing forward. And I think we always talk about those moments where, you know, crises meets character. And I think Caleb really rose to the challenge and he prevailed, you know, like many, many moons away beyond a lot of folks' expectations. So I'll throw it right back at you with that, Caleb. And I will say another person that I've thought of who I've never had the chance to meet. Jay, you may smile at this or may not, who knows? But Senator Hunter Andrews has been a very interesting character to me. Obviously, I've never had the chance to meet him. He passed away perhaps a decade before I stepped a foot in Virginia soil. I'm a come here from New York and New England prep schools. But I've got to say, you know, just reading about his life, his archives has all the information about him, his leadership, his time in the Virginia Senate, and also his strong advocacy for William and Mary, I've got to say, has been really inspiring. And I went to the archives very early on in my city council career to study him, and I hope to emulate him sometime.
And Jay, why don't you finish this out, and then I want to actually go back to what Benny and Caleb talked a little bit about, and that's running as a student. But Jay, why don't you finish this out?
I feel like mine are like too cheesy to follow these guys. No, I think, you know, like William Mary, you have so many people who you look up to, you know, who are alums and who aren't. You know, I'm really fortunate because my grandfather is the person who sort of inspires me and drives me day in and day out. And you know, I never met him. He passed away when my dad was a senior in college, but he was a pioneering civil rights attorney. He left Norfolk for college and law school, just like I ended up doing. And he came back just like I ended up doing and Brianna ended up doing. And, you know, I had my dad and my uncle integrate a school in Norfolk in 1961. All these things, you know, when I get frustrated, tired, upset, you know, angry about what I see in the world, you know, I think about the struggles that he went through and I stand on his shoulders. And so he has been my sort of biggest driving force in terms of public life. You know, my parents are also very much involved as well, but they're okay. You know, my grandfather is the guy for me. But, you know, I get to serve with people who went to William and Mary, right? Monty Mason, David Bulova, you know, Tommy Norman. I mean, you know, these people who have these sort of outsized reputations. And so it's never lost on me when I'm in the legislature, you know, that I'm amongst people who have had the same experience that I have and that we as a school, right, and as alums come from a really, really long line of people who have gotten involved at the federal, state, and local level. And so I think we have an incredible, you know, sort of lineage, but also an incredible burden because people look to us, right? Because we've been there. William and Mary is the you know, alma mater of a nation, if you will.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jay. And you know, as I said earlier, we've had, you know, 3 William Mary students elected to city council. 2 of them are on this call. And so with Caleb and Benny, you know, both of you had obviously been around politics before you ran, but describe what it was like as a student running and how that's a different experience from, you know, from a non-student in a very short, compressed amount of time.
Do you want me to take the first stab? Because I think Caleb has the more interesting story. Well, so I ran in 2016, the spring of my senior year. We are all alums here, but if there are any current students tuning in, and sorry, that's my cat. My cat's really, so if you hear noise off the distance, please ignore, I apologize. But don't do an honors thesis at the same time as running for office. Those were the late nights at Morton Hall after, you know, an incredibly busy day door knocking. We did phone banking. I would say in a very brief sentence to the way that will probably appreciate this was that it's as what Jay said, you're a principal of your own business. It's really a startup. And what was really cool about it was that it was entirely student run. I mean, I did have a political consultant who was a William and Mary alum in the DC area, but pretty much we just got a diverse team of students who just believed that there should be a student representative on city council, and being able to organize them and use some prior campaign experience something I'll touch on later, Will. But it's really been a formative experience. I guess that's really how I could put it. We could talk more about that in a short while. What do you think,
Yeah.
Caleb?
Yeah, and Caleb, it was about a year ago when you jumped in, right?
About a year ago. Yeah. So very brief timeline. February 25th, we announced. March 11th, obviously the world changed. At one point, the governor tried to push elections back to November, and then the legislature said, no, in fact, we'll do that in May. Then he did push them back 2 weeks. So it was a very hectic race. A lot of those dates stand out. March 11th was also the last day I got a parking ticket from William and Mary. So on the last day that they would have given a student one, they did give a student one. I can attest to that. I guess I'd say what it taught me more than anything is exactly how much it matters to a community that students, that young people more broadly are civically engaged. A lot of people in Williamsburg know this very, very well, that students are civically engaged. There can also sometimes be the standpoint that, young folks are only in the community on those Friday and Saturday nights before they get to the college deli porch. And what I found when their campus emptied out and we really wanted to still engage people, but we had to do so digitally. And I was the only member of the campaign team here in Williamsburg, but everyone that was on the team originally was still so engaged, and the students still wanted to vote. They still, if they were in town, would swing by the municipal building to vote in person. It really astounded me and showed me exactly how much the younger involvement in politics is important and how powerful it can be.
Thank you both. This next question I want to ask of Brianna first, and then Jay. As Benny said, we can't forget COVID in this discussion. So, what is it like to run a campaign during a pandemic? There are obvious negatives. Are there also any positives as far as strategy and then on the ground tactics?
I guess the biggest positive of running a campaign during a global pandemic is the fact that we have the ability to reach a larger, broader audience through social media. So instead of worrying about travel time and going from event to event, I oftentimes have like one Zoom call in the queue up on my screen, and that saves a great deal of time and energy. And therefore, I'm grateful for the way that we all have become so comfortable with being uncomfortable with our current circumstance. It is rough for someone like me who is such a hugger by nature. I love to be social, so therefore the idea of smizing and like greeting everyone with an elbow is just such an impersonal concept to me. But I really do feel that it also has showcased like the desire for people to really lean in. I feel like more people are far more informed in this moment than ever before, because we've all been forced to just sit and breathe and read and educate ourselves on everything that's happening around us and how we got here, but more importantly, how are we going to get out of it and how are we going to come out stronger? And because of that, I feel like we've come up with every creative way of engaging with the public. So that includes drive-through petition gatherings or like meeting with neighborhoods. So therefore I'll show up in a community and tell them they'll be there for 90 minutes and knock on a door. They know I'm coming. I gather what they need and I can help them understand their issues at hand. And then I follow up with an email that simply says like, these are the resources that are available to you. So being able to touch people in this moment has been far more desirable, but it's also been probably the easiest to assess and to really recognize the importance of that human interaction and really like lean into that moment. So I'm grateful for that.
What about, so, and Jay, I'll turn it over to you in a second, but, think of some of the, your daily, kind of a focus, fundraising is different, perhaps, and the way you're fundraising, the way you're holding events, obviously, are a lot of them are online. Has the pandemic affected, generally, and y'all are paying attention to this more than I am, but across the board, is fundraising steady for all candidates, or is it having an impact? And then what do you see this summer or the fall and leading up to get out the vote efforts changing, and as you look at maybe best circumstances?
Great question. So as far as fundraising, as a first-time candidate, I really can't tell you about the difference between like now versus yesteryear. So I'll leave that to Jay. But as far as our ability to engage with the audience, I think that what's probably been the most impactful is the fact that we are, as I mentioned, sitting at home and are so engaged that therefore we're getting involved in general. When I say they and we, I mean like the public. I feel like we're getting involved in races that we probably like would just typically receive an email for in a way that we never had in the past. So people are actually paying attention to those. And I think that we saw that because I feel like everyone in the world stopped and watched what happened in Georgia. But at the same time, I think everyone in the world is in one way or another donated to those races in Georgia. So I think we all felt that too here. Jay, I'll let you definitely talk to that one. But I think that that's definitely changed the way that we engage the public. As far as we like looking to the future, I think that people are really looking forward to being able to engage and take part in the political process in a new way and have come up with those safety measures. But more importantly, I think we've also adopted many of the norms that came from the pandemic. So here in Prince William County, we're going to have drive-through voting no matter what for our primary election cycle here in June, and more than likely may happen in November moving forward.
Well, thank you. And Jay, you're of course campaigning all over the state. And so I know you have to get out as much as you can. And so talk about your experience the last few months.
Yeah, I mean, I can empathize with Caleb because we finished the legislative session in like the first week of March of 2020, and our plan was to get on the road and be places 3, 4, 5 times a week, right? Sort of in the spring and into the summer. And then the world changed on March 11th. And after that, you had to sort of reorient yourself. So I guess the bad thing is that we couldn't really go anywhere, but the good thing is that I've been able to now be in a lot of different places in the state in one night, right? Like tonight, we're physically in DC/Williamsburg. After this, I'll go to Spotsylvania. And after that, I'll go to Danville, right? That's cool. And I think it's forced people to be engaged in a way that we've never seen before. I also think that it brings up issues as it relates to internet access. And I've visited several party committees over the course of the year that can't do Zoom because the members don't have internet, reliable internet access. And so you have to be creative. We have started to sort of move around a little bit more, now that people are getting vaccinated at a higher clip. So that's good. But I think that at least for the foreseeable future, I still think that the gatherings of, more than 50, 100, 250 are going to be on ice for, probably until the summer or the fall. And so I think that has forced everyone, whether you're running for the House or statewide, to sort of rejigger your strategy. I think you asked about fundraising. I don't think fundraising has slipped at all. We raised over $1 million last year for this campaign. And, I think that is something that people probably wouldn't have expected when the year started in terms of the number. But I think that you've seen that people are still willing to give. I think part of that is because our economy is still sort of moving along at a pretty good clip. Obviously, there's a lot of work to do, but not what anybody envisioned with masks and elbows and all of these things. But I think we've been able to figure it out. And, we successfully managed a presidential campaign last year and some federal races. And now we're going to do it again in the sort of state level. But I will sort of give a plug to my colleagues and myself. We changed the laws to make it easier to vote before the pandemic was a thing. We had some of the most restrictive voting laws in Virginia in the country. There was a study in 2016 from Northern Illinois that said Virginia was the 49th state in terms of ease of access to voting, and now we are 12th. And I think we're going to jump up even higher because of the Virginia Voting Rights Act, which we just passed. So we were pretty prescient, I think, which enabled us to have a really sort of easy process last year. And I think if most, if not all of those procedures will stay, and I think that's a good thing.
Great answer, Catherine.
We are.
Questions.
Yeah, we are starting to get a few questions from the audience. So thank you everyone for your engagement. Well, first one, I'll defer to you, Benny, but we do have a anonymous panelist that asked to see your cats. So if you get a chance to show that, I'll leave that to you.
I will definitely try. They just left the room, but as soon as he comes back, I will be sure to show everybody.
So that was a fun one, but I guess getting a bit more serious. First question, how much money are we talking about, or how much money is involved in local government elections? And anyone that could answer that.
pre-pandemic, I raised about $20,000. But this is for City of Williamsburg, population of 15,000. A lot of it went into, if you want to really talk about campaign lingo, a lot of it went to direct mailing. I told, Caleb has heard me say this so many times, but what I've been told is, you want to get as many touches as possible. So that's direct voter contact. If you could help it, if you have a locality or a district that's small enough where you can do 2 rounds of door knocking, supremely helpful. And then after you're done with that, follow up with a thank you note and do at least 2 or 3 more mailers. And it's all tailored towards a different geographics and wherever you're at. But generally, you want to keep voters reminded about you. And we talked about throughout this conversation about social media taking precedence in the pandemic. That is effectively what it's happening. You're trying to engage with that direct voter contact as much as possible. And I would say phone banking, I wouldn't be surprised if that increased throughout the pandemic era as well. Caleb, what do you think?
And then maybe during and post-pandemic era, I raised about 12,000 for my race. I think a lot of that, because it was less, as you were saying, Benny, did not go to events. It didn't go to, I think you had maybe guacamole at the polls when you were there. So we forewent some of those things. We did, of course, invest heavily in advertisements online, in direct mailers, a little bit in yard signs, do less in yard signs than what you think. And I'd also recommend and there are a number of resources out there, find yourself a very good database about some of the demographics of people in your area so that you're making sure every dollar spent is actually getting to the exact people that you want to. We were able to purchase one that showed us who has just requested an absentee ballot. So then as that ballot was headed to that person, we were able to call them and, introduce ourselves in the campaign. And a lot of the times people say, well, what do you know? We just requested an absentee ballot and we'll make sure to vote for you as well. So certainly having as much data as you can. And then as Benny said, as many touches as you can get on someone, whether ideally in person and with a conversation, but on the phone or through a mailer or through a digital advertisement also are so helpful.
I hate yard signs.
Same
Just
here,
for
I'm with you, Jay.
They're terrible.
Just for perspective, I got really jealous hearing about the $12,000 and $20,000 that you guys raised. I just ended this quarter with a little over $116,000 on hand, but I need to raise about $1.4 million between now and November. So that's how much my race is going to cost. Operating in the Northern Virginia, DC media market, making sure that as a first-time candidate with no name ID that I had to get my name out. So pandemic or not, it's going to be exceptionally expensive. So there will be no guac at the polls, but Benny, I'm all ears for other salient ideas that may help.
So Brianna,
like,
what's the website that people should go to right now if they want to donate?
Poolfordelegate.com. Thank you, Caleb.
Put it in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, seriously, I will.
For those listening, I just want to say, like, what you just heard, right, especially with Brianna, that's $1 million for a seat that represents like 85,000 people, maybe a little bit less because of the old sort of lines. That is exactly why we need campaign finance reform. And I can get on my soapbox about that all day. But that job that she's running for, that I have also, pays you $17,625 a year. So you want to sort of put that in perspective. It's crazy what we have to do and what people are asked to do. And it is a barrier to, I think, a lot of good people who want to get involved in politics because they may not have the ability to raise money like that. We're fortunate because we have a great network from William and Mary, right? A lot of folks who I went to school with contributed to my campaign in 17 and 19 and now in 21. But a lot of great people just don't have the same sort of access and the same sort of resources. And so it really makes you think why we operate as we do and why we might want to think about changing it in the future to make our system more sort of open to other people.
Catherine, I may, this other question from the chat, this comes from Rector of the Board, John Littell. First, thanking you all for being here tonight. And, just, the obvious, politics, as he says here, like in other parts of our society, can be toxic. How do you do your job? How do you run for office and your campaign? How do you try to stay above that?
I'd be curious to hear what Jay and Brianna have to say first, because Williamsburg, I think we're a little bit easier, but.
Brianna, do you want to go first?
Sure.
Yeah.
I would say running in my hometown, there is a personal connection. And I feel like in many ways, this campaign's so personal because I grew up here.
Right.
I still live here. I work here in this community. My parents live a mile away. And this is my forever home. I chose that. But because of that commitment and connection, I think that seeing it for its beauty is definitely something that's easy to do on its surface, but recognizing that it can be better is something that you have to feel within your stomach. And I always like to say it's like the fire in the belly as to how I even ended up in this position. I never saw myself running for office. I know like a lot of us say that, but I genuinely saw an issue in my community. I wanted to fix it. And you really just have to be really grounded in what you're doing. And I'm running such a localized campaign that I have the chance to really turn off like a lot of the noise around me and just remember the stories that I've heard and the stories that I hope to hear and take with me to like really effectuate some positive change.
Yeah, I would agree, right? I represent the district that my dad represented for 15 years. I represent my childhood home. I live a mile and a half from my parents as well. But I think as I've moved up a little bit in terms of visibility, you've got to learn that you don't need to read social media. I'm fortunate enough that I now have someone who does that for me. I just scroll Twitter in the morning once, but don't ever read the comments about you or below your post, because the first thing that you've got to learn, and my first campaign manager from 4 years ago, who now is a member of the House of Delegates as well, the first thing he said to me, he goes, look, you got to realize not everyone is going to like you and not everybody's going to vote for you. And I think once you internalize that, it makes it a lot easier. But you certainly need to find a group of people who aren't in politics, who you rely on and trust, so you can go blow off some steam with them. I have a pretty tight group of people who I still hang out with from high school and college, and they don't treat me any differently, right? They're like, we don't care if you're a delegate, we don't care what you are, you're Jay, and we're going to treat you as such, which is as everybody else would. And they don't care about what's going on, whether I'm a Democrat or what Republican policies are coming up. I mean, we just don't talk about it, and because this stuff can consume you if you're not careful. And it's always good to be able to sort of step back and get away from it all, because I think we all as people, right, this isn't just about politics, have a tendency to see what's right in front of us and view that as the most immediate thing on the planet. And there's a lot more going on in the world than what we see right in front of us. And so it's about keeping perspective. It's about having a group of people who you can trust. And it's about finding some other ways to sort of, expend some energy, because, this isn't the be all end all for sure. There's a lot more to life.
Thanks, Jay, and thanks, Brianna. Let's do another William Mary question. William Mary, of course, as you know, has some incredible traditions, whether it's candlelight convocation, Charter Day, King and Queen Ball, last day classes, and for those who aren't as young, blowout. We'll start with Caleb. What's your favorite tradition?
The triathlon.
For those who, I assume everyone knows that, right? But just in case there's somebody who doesn't, what is?
Yeah, sure. So it's a really good way to get involved in your community and to get to know the school intimately. I'm not sure about the order of it, but the three legs are swimming in the Creme Dell, running across the sunken garden without your outer garments, and then jumping the wall of the governor's palace to do the maze. If you can do them all in one night, you're a champion.
I hope Cliff Fleet is not listening to this right now, or CW Security.
This is recorded.
Yeah.
Brianna.
I'll say my favorite tradition is definitely the candlelight ceremony, but I will say most memorable would have to be that my birthday, my senior year, was on Blowout, and I'll leave that there.
Excellent. Benny.
So again, I'm lame compared to everybody else, but I love graduation. Maybe I went through it twice, one virtual and one in person, but there's just something about it with everybody. You too, Will, looking great up there and snazzy on the stage. Bob Gates there, and also the choir singing. the school song, it always, for whatever reasons, just gets me emotional. So I look forward to it every time.
Absolutely. And Jay, finish us out here.
Oh, King and Queen, man, that was awesome. I somehow always had to end up having like friends who were visiting, and I think that was always a really good way to show them what the school was all about. And we always had a good time, and I own something garden, and it's dancing and food. It was great.
Excellent. Well, all right. So back to talking to a William Mary student. If you could give advice to a William Mary student or a recent alum who's interested in seeking office or just getting involved in politics, what would you tell them? And I'll start with Benny.
Yeah, I would say, I would advise, and Caleb's heard me say this so many times, and I tell this to folks who always seek out advice for whatever reason. They should probably go to Jay and not me. But what I tell them is, one, they should probably work on a few campaigns. And I always say at least 2, because there's nothing of a rocket science when it comes to door knocking or making phone calls or asking for donations. It's incredibly awkward when you first do it. And that's why you want to get more exposure doing it, especially by the time you are doing it yourself. And for some folks, it's easier for them to get to it once it's about themselves, which actually kind of sounds weird when I say it, but it's true. Some people are able to kind of groove into it when they're launching their own candidacy, but you want to kind of get it from both perspectives. I think that's really helpful to kind of get a sense, just being in the room, of all the dynamics around it. You want to know all the details, unless if you work in a couple cycles, but at least 2, I would say. And then the second most important thing for folks who want to run is, why do you want to run? And if they can't answer that and articulate it, that's fine. That doesn't mean that you wouldn't be able to do it later on, but be sure to start thinking about that, because there is a lot of glamour to the title, right? We're all called the honorables, whatever. But it's what's important about it is that there's an incredible burden to it. And I think William Mary touches really well that there's a lot of weight to put into public service. So be careful for what you ask for. And when you ask that question, that you really think about that.
Yeah, Jay.
I mean, is "don't do it" an answer? I'm kidding.
It is.
I would echo everything that Benny said. And so I think people need to door knock and do those things, because, there's nothing like doing it until you're the principal, right? And so when I first ran, I had only done it a little bit, but I wanted to learn. And so I forced my field director, my campaign manager, to teach me how to use Van, right? To teach me how to cut turf for door knocking. I knocked doors myself, and I made all these phone calls myself. And I always tell people who work with me now, I don't ask you to do anything that I wouldn't do myself, but I needed to learn. And I think everybody assumed, because my dad was involved in this and my grandfather was involved in this, that I just knew what to do. And that's not true. When I started running, I was 27. I was a kid, right? I'm 32 now. And you got to ask yourself some real questions, right? Do I want to do this? Because it's a big burden, and it takes a lot of your time, energy. I've lost weight, I've lost hair, off my head, and years off my life. But, do you really want to do this? Because it's not something to do lightly. And then you say, okay, can I raise the money? Because money is important in politics until it's not, right? And that's another plug for campaign finance reform. And then you ask yourself, can you win? Because you want to win so you can make a change. And so you've got to have some real conversations with your family, right? My wife is, God bless her, lets me do this stuff. My parents, I don't see them very much anymore, but they appreciate what I'm doing. And you got to talk to your employer, right? I had to have a long sit down with my law firm about whether or not I could work there and run for the House of Delegates at the same time. But I'd say go get involved in other stuff, right? I am kind of fascinated with political history. Barbara Bush, I think, told her family members, she goes, go do something else before you get involved in this stuff, right? That teaches you a lot about life, about yourself, about what's going on. But I think every single person who's on this chat will agree, and I'll stop talking after this, it's about timing, right? You got to rise to meet a moment, and we were all in the right place at the right time. And that, I think, is the most important part, because Brianna saw an issue that she wanted to go fix explicitly. Benny was there as a student and said, I want to be that student representative on council because we need a voice. And I think Caleb was probably the same. I wanted to run because my district was the only one that was wholly contained in Norfolk. And I wanted Norfolk to have a strong voice in the legislature who represented a whole bunch of different folks, because we have a really diverse district. And so, but it was timing, right? If I was 6 months early or 6 months late, it probably wouldn't have worked out the way that it did. So you got to make sure, one, that it's the right time, but you got to have some really honest conversations with yourself about whether you actually want to do it, because it is a lot more work than I think people believe and understand it to be.
That's right. Brianna, what advice would you give to a student or a recent alum?
I would encourage them to call one of us on this panel, to be honest. We're here for a reason, and we all talk about the importance of tapping into our William & Mary network. We're all a phone call away, an email away, and we're going through it. First-time candidate, past candidates, current candidates. We're happy to answer questions and to have those brutally honest conversations. And I really don't think that anything can prepare you for running for office. Would be something that I would keep everyone's perspective on, but I would more importantly share that you don't know what you don't know. And I feel like I'm still learning it as I go along, but I'm happy to share what I've experienced.
Excellent. And Caleb, I think you're last.
Yeah, I'll make it quick because everyone has so eloquently spoken already, and I think hit the main points. So certainly get involved, as Jay said, that Barbara Bush said, whether that be a service opportunity or, as Benny said, another campaign just to learn the ins and the outs. And then the only thing I'd reiterate is, it's important to know your why. If someone asks, why are you running? And you can say, well, here are points 1, 2, 3. I mean, I can still tell you the acronym we used, OAR, Opportunity, Accountability, Responsibility. But I think more importantly than that, when it gets to the grit of a race, Brianna mentioned the sleepless nights that she sometimes has now, and just being very, very busy. You got to know more like, what's your why right here? And so Brianna and Jay, in mentioning it, they're representing their hometowns. Benny, I know you and I felt this. We wanted to continue the tradition of that younger representation in Williamsburg, which had brought good things to the city. So if you are out there considering your race, certainly have ideas that you're running on. Obviously know the why if someone asks, but you got to know the why of what's going to make you want to really work for it.
Thank you. Catherine, let me do this one more question. And let's see. So all of you are young. And so how has your relative youth helped you in your political pursuits? And to what extent you think youth has been a hindrance or could be? How have you overcome it, or what do you think you could do to overcome it? And maybe I'll start with the old man on this. We'll start with Jay and then kind of go to the youngest.
Yeah, I mean, being young, I think it's the best thing that could have happened to me when I was running, because you got the most energy, right? I mean, sort of coming off the last question, it's a lot of work. And I think every single person, Brianna, Caleb, and Benny will agree, like, you are working all day, right? It's not like this is fun and games, and you see what's happening on social media, and I think we portray a certain thing because that's what we want people to see, but it's a lot of work. And so being young, I think, helps because you've got a lot of energy and passion, and conviction. But I had to really convince a lot of old people that I was worthy of being their representative in Richmond. You guys can't see it. I do have a lot of gray hair. So that was like kind of my entree, because I would knock on doors and people would say, are you even old enough to vote? And I'd say, yes, I am. And then, that was sort of a way to break the ice, which was kind of cool. But certainly convincing generations above you that you're responsible, you're worthy, you can do it, you're up to the task. And I think the best way to sort of get around that is to know your stuff, right? When someone asks you about an issue, you've got to be prepared. You've got to be, sort of ready to go on that. And I think we all have done that. But it helps, because I think now what you've seen probably in the last decade or so is people who are younger are getting more involved in politics. It's no longer this game for older people and frankly, older white men. I think politics is becoming more diverse. And that's a good thing, right? I came in the class of 2017 in the House of Delegates, and I was 28. Lee Carter was 30. Chris Hurst was 32. Schuyler Van Valkenburg was 35. Carrie Delaney was 37. I mean, we had Danica Rome was 30, 32, 33. We had a lot of young people. And I think that really was great for all of us. Emily Brewer was 34. It was great for all of us, not only to have people who were in our age cohort, but it sort of demonstrated to everybody that we had, what it takes. And, I don't ever want anyone to think that age is a disqualifier. I think it's more of an asset than anything. It's only a disqualifier if you let it become that. But I think if you're prepared, if you know what you're talking about, that the age thing kind of melts away pretty quickly.
Great point. Brianna?
For so long, I think it's been apropos to ask a woman her age. but I've chosen to just like completely lean into it now that people are so comfortable asking me my age on the phone. I will remember when I first like wrote my press release, like for announcing that I was running for office, I got a call back from one of our local reporters who like asked me my age because he said that they always published that in the articles. And of course, the first thing I did was check to make sure that that was true. But it is the case. And I will absolutely credit William and Mary though, with the fact that much like Jay said, I've completely leaned into the youth because that doesn't take away from my experience. And I credit William and Mary for letting me always have a seat at the table. I feel that throughout my educational experience and time at the college, they value the voices of students so much when I was at the college, and I'm sure that that continues to this day, that I feel that I belong at the table. So the idea that I don't, or that my age should be a hindrance as to whether I should have a seat as a member of the House of Delegates is not a concept that I will ever lean into. And in fact, it sounds foreign. And it's really given me the confidence in my career to be able to speak to much of my experience now that I am running for office. And I'm really grateful that I've had that.
Great point. Benny.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jay has touched on a lot of the good points, and I'll reiterate some with my personal experience. Also to add, I think some of the contributing factors to his gray hair may be the billable hours his law firm is pushing him to get as well. But
going on leave to campaign full time has actually like alleviated the stress like a little bit. So
I was wondering about that. But for me, it's an interesting dynamic, right? So Williamsburg is one of those where students are a huge voting bloc. So, the youth factor is, I think, a huge asset, I would agree. But also in some ways, I think you also really need to know your why, because you have your peers who are looking at you, who are observing you saying, why should I vote for this guy who's like my age? It's almost an interesting dynamic when you put it that way. And just to reinforce what Jay had said, you've got to be able to really know why, because your peers are going to be like, maybe this guy just wants to do this for his resume. They're thinking about maybe, some way to see if you're legitimate, if you're genuine, and you're doing this beyond probably, what we're all used to at the time, which is join clubs, do extracurriculars and whatnot. I think in terms of a big asset with the community, one thing I have reflected a lot about youth, it was certainly a big factor to consider in the race. And when you're in the campaign trail, you want to have a good campaign team that helps you think through all these things. I'm a person of color, I'm young, there are many different factors that come into this as well. But one of the things that I think was a big benefit was that it forced me to listen a lot. So Williamsburg, and as long with, with every other locality, but Williamsburg has a very highly educated residential retired population. Like a neighbor, like right across the street from me, there are 2 ex-CIA agents and maybe 1 retired NASA astronaut. Like these are like top of the line guys who've seen budgets, who've seen, complex stuff in boardrooms. And now there's there's a 21-year-old kid there standing at the doorstep trying to run for office. I think by listening to their issues, that's something that I found that in my race, my competitors, I think they were always eager to push back on an argument or to say, no, you're wrong. That's why I'm running. And this is my issue. For me, I just shut up and listened. And ultimately, I've heard this as feedback. People, I think, really appreciate that at the end of the day.
All right, Caleb.
Yeah, I think Benny said it best in how important it is to listen, especially when you're running at the local level here in Williamsburg. I'll say, young people are they're adaptable. We didn't enter the race thinking there would be the global pandemic, but when it happened, even though no one was here in person and everyone was working by themselves, we still had the semblance of a campaign team. It was just a virtual one. And we were able to very quickly understand, how can we use data to help us? How can we get advertisements to be targeted to the right people? So I found that having a young campaign, even though we didn't have a lot of people that were seasoned with races on their resume, really made us able to rise to the moment and come out on top in the end.
Thanks. Let me ask a couple of direct questions. I think we probably have about 25 minutes left. So, Jay, so you served 4 intense, General Assembly sessions. It's become a full-time job. Even before running for statewide office. can you share a piece of your legislative agenda, that's most meaningful to you? Maybe that goes back to a campaign issue, but if not, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, look, I'm proud of every bill that I've put up that's gotten through. It's not, you don't put that stuff in lightly. I think the one that I'm most proud of that I'll remember when I'm long gone from public service is probably the Ashanti Alert, which I introduced in my first term, which was the sort of byproduct of a terrible situation that happened in Norfolk back in 2017 when a young woman was abducted from the naval base and was unfortunately found several days later in North Carolina, and she had been murdered. And we didn't have a missing persons alert for people between the ages of 18 and 65. You've got amber for children and silver for old people. And the data suggested that if you had resources mobilized very quickly after someone was missing, the odds of finding them are much higher. And so we were able to put that in the minority, get it done, get money in the budget to help the state police implement this. And then so successful, right, that they actually did this at the federal level. Senator Warner and then Representative Scott Taylor sponsored the federal Ashanti Alert, which actually passed as well. And so to me, that will live on for a long, long time and will save some lives over the course of many years. And I'm really proud of that. We've done some really tremendous things, expanding Medicaid, putting money into our transportation systems. I mean, I could go on and on, but that one sort of sticks out for me because it was personal, because I had gotten to know the family very well, sort of in the aftermath. And so for them to see that and then to go have the bill signed in the Patrick Henry building with the governor was pretty special.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. Appreciate that. And Caleb, you graduated William & Mary on, I think it was May 16th of last year. You got elected to council 3 days later, sworn in July 1st. Talk about what it's like, when the campaign is over and when you actually have to do something in that time period.
So, broadly, when the campaign is over, you're probably going to have a wave of exhaustion hit you like a tsunami. And that's about what happened to me the day after. I think I slept for 20 hours straight, and that's not an exaggeration. But afterwards, you need to do everything you can, and you should be considering this as you're actually campaigning too, in recognizing the people that have helped you get to where you are. It's the age-old adage, you can go fast alone, but you can go far together. And so any campaign, whether successful or not electorally, is built on people who are likely volunteering their time to knock those doors for you, to make the phone calls for you. So what you need to consider after a campaign, and what I tried to, is how do I recognize the people that were so helpful to me, and then how can I actually thank them myself? So that's thank you notes, that's group dinners, which we were able to do socially distanced at the cheese shop when everyone was back in town. You might go the way of a campaign stipend if you're able to, but however you can, make sure that you are thanking everyone who has helped you along the way. You'll find it is a significant amount of people.
Sure. Benny, you, after graduation, you went to law school and served on council while in law school. So how did that education and your involvement kind of help you through council or and then now beyond?
Absolutely. Well, first, let me say real quick, just to add on what I said before, if you are a current student watching this, do not do an honors thesis while you run for office, because I defended my honors thesis the day after I won my election, which I have no idea how it would have gone, honestly, if I had lost. Maybe it's like what Caleb said. It doesn't really hit you till way later on, especially with the swearing in, but maybe I would have been fine. But to your question, law school was a wonderful intersection of policy and the law, and folks who may be tuning in, definitely, Jay, will be able to appreciate this. But with my law school, we put an emphasis on experiential learning. So we've got clinics. I got to help out veterans locally here, get their disability rating up. But more locally, we have a wonderful domestic violence clinic that provides much needed services to protect folks, try to get their temporary protective order in our local courts. So with my third year law certificate, which allows you to practice in the court under supervision of a duly licensed attorney, to argue before JDR court judges, and to be able to sit in, thanks to federal grants and state grants, allow law enforcement and actually one of our big safety net nonprofits, the Avalon Center, they all have a seat at the table. And it's really interesting because they kind of go through case files of, you know, folks that have had repeated offenses, and they kind of monitor these folks. These are perspectives I would have never had as a council member, just as a council member. You know, obviously all of city staff have a seat there, but to be able to have a eyewitness view there to see really truly how much our city staff devotes themselves, human services, along with law enforcement and our area nonprofits. That's the kind of rewarding behind the scenes stuff that you get to see as a law student. Very thankful that the law school has those clinic programs there. Last thing is Virginia Coastal Policy Center. Sea level rise is a huge thing. I know, Jay, for you in Norfolk is huge. Hampton, we did a lot of studies. That's a little bit more policy, not too much law, but we work with the Sea Grant Foundation, Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and other organizations to try to combat that.
Sea level rise impacts everybody. Don't let anyone tell you it's just a regional issue. That is literally a statewide issue.
That's
Even
true.
me, even
This is true.
8
This is
hours.
true.
It's true. You know what? Keep going, Will. I'll stop.
No, it's fine. So let me ask one more William Mary question, and then we'll go into a few kind of hopefully more fun political campaign questions. So if you could go back in time, you're moving in to your freshman dorm. What would you tell your freshman self that day? Good advice for William Mary, in case we have students on this Zoom. So I'll start with Brianna.
Jay had like unmuted too. He was ready. I like almost like I need to like yield the floor. He was ready for it. Go for it, Jay.
Jay, go first.
It is more gym, less calf.
Good one.
I think that I came into William and Mary with like such a clear idea of what I was going to study and like what I was going to do. And I would probably tell myself to like tear that paper up, and any student to do the same, and just allow yourself to just embrace all the classes that you're taking, and take one class that is completely outside of your comfort zone and completely outside of your major each semester, because they oftentimes end up being my favorite courses and the ones I walked away with the greatest understanding of self, or like the greatest challenge.
Great answer. Caleb.
I'd go back, I'd take myself by the shoulders and I'd say, get involved early, don't get over involved. So to any student listening, don't get over involved. But for myself, I came here, I didn't know a soul. I certainly liked the school. I just didn't feel like I didn't go to the club fair in that first couple of weeks. I didn't really join clubs in that first semester, kind of did the second semester. I'd want to join earlier. I'd want to really dive into the William Mary culture.
Benny.
Yeah, I'm with you on Caleb. That's what I did in law school, but I would say just drop the pre-med, Benny. 18-year-old Benny, you're not good at sciences. Just take a class with Jackson Sasser. Maybe you would have done a little bit better at law school if you did, but that's what I've always said.
Excellent. Okay, let's go to the campaign. So do you remember, and I'll start with Brianna this time, is there the moment that you got bit by the political bug, or your first political memory, or something that kind of sets you on the path to get engaged in campaigns and ultimately run for office? Any of the above.
Okay, so my parents were both born and raised in Selma, Alabama. So crossing over the Edmund Pettus Bridge is the way that I go to my grandparents' houses. But I think that what led me to actually decide that running and being a public servant would be part of my future were more closely related to like my experience of growing up in this community. So even though I'm an Air Force brat, I had the strange opportunity of growing up and matriculating through a single public school system. And therefore I had an opportunity to like really get to know my community. And there was a moment here where we really struggled with immigration reform. Prince William County sadly became the inspiration for the state of Arizona. And I was in high school when that was happening and playing out. And witnessing my classmates while I was in this international baccalaureate program where we're getting this global perspective, and my classmates didn't feel as if they belonged not only in our community, but it belongs in the US, was like something that really challenged me and really shook me to my core. And that was like the beginning of the desire to make sure that no one ever felt like other.
Thank you. Benny.
Yeah, it really came out of a love for community service. And I'll briefly mention high school. It bit me. You know, I've been very interested in politics starting high school. You know, one of my classmates was Senator Ted Kennedy's granddaughter. One of our presidents, John F. Kennedy, had graduated from the same high school. So there was always this aura of, and that's not to like spitball it, obviously, but you know, everyone was always so interested in it, that kind of privileged access. Actually, when I came to college, I tried to quit politics again, doing my pre-med, run my 3 miles a day, be a boring dude, but it didn't happen that way, thank goodness. What really got it restarted was the student assembly had asked for volunteers to serve as election officials for the presidential election. This is President Obama's re-election year in 2012. And I was there just, you know, helping out. And generally the election volunteers are the same folks from the same neighborhood. And they recognized that, you know, I took the one step to you know, just be an election officer. They kind of approached me and said, you want to learn a little bit more about your city and maybe you can contribute back. So I sat in one of the first city council meetings where they try to do this R1 to R2 zoning, so boring. But one thing that I came away with it that I was really impressed, you know, again, in contrast to high school where it seems that access is always so privileged, in local politics, I could just go up to the dais and shake someone's hand. I mean, that was so cool to 18-year-old Benny, you know, and even though the R1 to R2 zoning really just didn't make any sense to me at the time, and honestly didn't really care for it, I just loved being able to go up to the mayor, you know, of Williamsburg and say, how are you doing? And he would respond back. So that's really where it started. You know, the politics bug bit me for at least getting involved in the Williamsburg community.
All right, and Caleb.
I didn't feel bit by the politics bug all that early. My family doesn't engage too much. I wish as a young kid I'd been watching the presidential debates. I certainly will with my children, but I wasn't. I think if you'd asked me, you know, senior year of high school, what I want to do, I'd say business, and yeah, that's also as specific as I could be. Probably when I started considering it here in Williamsburg was again one of the first few weeks on campus when I checked my student mailbox, and there is a glossy double-sided postcard from Councilman Benny Zhang, who I guess at that point was just trying to schmooze future voters. Who knows? But then I ended up meeting Benny. I said, "Wow, he's so likable."
So cynical already. We're supposed to be uplifting in this webinar, right? Anyway, sorry.
No. I mean, I found Benny likable and educated and so interesting that a 22-year-old could serve at that point. So that was sort of, I guess, the door opening, you could say. After I had that period of just uninvolvement, maybe freshman year, trying to dive in a little bit more sophomore year, I was with a group. We were applying for Impact Week, which is sort of a way to fundraise on campus and donate it to something that's in the local community here. And I was calling nonprofits, seeing which one we could partner with. And I got the director of our House of Mercy on the phone, Shannon Wallenowzinski, who kind of answered and said, "So you want to partner and give us money?" I said, "Yeah, that's about it." And so we partnered with the House of Mercy, and for them for about 3 years, I worked with them on a number of fundraising campaigns. And the House of Mercy, for those who are on the call and might not know, is our area's only full service homeless shelter. So that was my first real eye-opening experience, 19 or so, having first gotten involved in the community, is learning that Williamsburg does has a significant homeless population, and those children are in our school districts, and we have difficulties with affordable housing too. So knowing it was possible and then seeing some of the issues that could be addressed was really the motivating factor.
Thank you. So this is a question that open for anyone who wants to respond, doesn't have to, but or you don't have to. Campaigns, you know, to some may seem glamorous, but they're hard work, they're highs and lows. Anybody have a campaign disaster that you're willing to share, and maybe it's more, you know, lighthearted?
It's like COVID, broadly. I'll give a quick short example, maybe. Jay and Brianna, you all know this so well right now. You're in a million places when you're campaigning. You're calling a lot of people. You all in campaigning in much broader regions than I do, or talking to people in a lot of different areas. Sometimes you can get a little frazzled. I had a number of phone calls there getting close to election day. And so as I'm going down this list, I'm on the phone with someone whose name looks kind of familiar, but it's a small town. A lot of people do. And I call them up and they say, yeah, I've got a couple minutes, kind of give me your pitch. And so I gave them my pitch. It was a professor at William Mary Law School. And at the end, she said, yeah, Caleb, we spoke 3 hours ago. You gave me the pitch then too. And I just, the blood drained out of my face, even though no one can see me. I was mortified and I profusely apologized. And she just sort of laughed it off and said, I get it. And, I'll still support you. But that was not necessarily a crisis, but certainly the realization of too many sleepless nights.
Well, that was, I guess it's really on her because she kind of just let you give the whole pitch the whole time, right? She was just kind of sassing you there.
Part of it was the prank on her part of like, let's see when he notices. And he did not notice.
Well, I can go next, and this is not really a disaster. And for some reason, I was trying to come up with a juicy big disaster story from the campaign trail, but my memory serves only one in particular. My staff we had done a series of emails to boost up our GOTV. Well, first half for Williamsburg, and Caleb knows this very well, is voter registration drives to get as many students to register to vote as possible. And then you kind of do a massive shift to GOTV. We're very simple when it comes to retail politicking here in Williamsburg, obviously different everywhere else as a disclosure. But one of the emails had several grammatical errors. And the campaign staffers that wrote it shall remain anonymous. But with William and Mary students, you'll know this, and we all know this very well, but you see a mistake, like a misspelling or something, the replies start coming back in saying, wow, you can't even write a good sentence, or you can't even spell, like, why should I even vote for you anymore? And my campaign folks thought it was like the end of the world. And I was just in class. I didn't know what was going on. And thank goodness.
Benny then unloaded on them.
The only other thing I would say was TikTok was big at that time. And my campaign manager is also an alum, Seth Apoki-Boa, who worked with the governor's office. And I know some of you guys know very well. He was following TikTok all the time, man. Whenever there was a bad or something that was, even remotely insulting me, he would get all the campaign staffers to downvote them until they disappeared. I thought that was kind of funny.
Yik Yak, right, Benny?
Yik Yak. Oh, TikTok. That's a TikTok. I'm sorry, Yik Yak. Duh. Thank you, Caleb.
I don't know the difference between those two, but and Jay and Brian, you don't have to share that. I have a question about a more positive.
I was just gonna say, I think I was knocking doors my first time, and you're so focused because you're like, I want to hit every door and I want to hit this whole packet. I want to knock it out. And I was walking through this neighborhood called Rosemont, which is a big precinct in Norfolk. And if you win Rosemont, you're gonna win the election. And I was so just dialed into my phone because you have Van on your phone, and it was a little bit chilly. And I was walking on the sidewalk, and a dog like ran across its backyard and like kind of ran up on the fence and scared the living mess out of me. And I like jumped and like kind of fell off the curb and like twisted my ankle and could like barely walk. And I had to call my campaign manager. I was like, please come pick me up. Like, I'm so embarrassed. And he was like, are you serious? And I was like, I really can't walk, but I don't want to tell you why. He finally coaxed out of me why. He told everybody on staff, and they all laughed at me for days on end. But when you're so singularly focused, even stuff like that, you're just like, what the hell? But that's what makes it fun.
Yeah. Brianna, I don't know if you have one, but I can move to the positive stories if you'd like.
I don't have any good embarrassing stories just yet. I think like the worst thing that's happened to me thus far is that like when doing call time and calling and dialing for dollars, sometimes they don't answer and they call you back. But if someone can work on making sure that iPhone reveals everyone's name versus just saying wireless caller when they return that phone call, that'd be amazing, because they expect you to know exactly who's calling, but you can't tell the phone number. And I definitely have had my moments where I've answered and I've learned to stop that just so I can like give myself a minute to figure out who this is, who's returning my call, and how much I want to talk to them.
That's actually good. So from the glasses half full perspective, there are obviously a lot of uplifting moments in campaigns that make you realize this is why you're running. And so if anyone has a moment during a campaign or this current campaign that you really won't forget for years, please share.
I got one. I was in a hotly contested primary my first time, and you're doing everything you can to win. And so we raised money and we sent mail and we had phone bankers and we did all this door knocking. And I went to every civic league multiple times over, all these churches, and you do everything you're supposed to do. And I remember knocking doors a couple of days before the election, and I knocked on this woman's door, and she said, you know, somebody called here earlier talking about you. I've gotten every single one of your mail pieces. And at that point, I picked up her mail and gave her the last one. She goes, you've been to my civic league, 3 times. You've been to my church twice. She goes, I was never going to vote for you, and now you're on my doorstep. And she goes, but you have forced me based on sheer will to vote for you because you clearly want this. And that was like a very rewarding moment, throughout all this campaign stuff, because it does get, there are highs and lows, it gets bleak, but that was one of those things where I'm like, okay, we've done something right. Even if I lose, I will always remember this. And so I've actually since gone back to her house and thanked her for that. But yeah, that was a pretty special moment.
That's very good.
I could go ahead. Jay had hit on a really good point. Those moments are like the best moments you'll find. If Brianna, I'm sure you've had moments like this. When you run for a political campaign, you get something like that. It's like the most rewarding experience either. But not to repeat, kind of on the same trend with that. We had a candidates forum when I ran in one of the last vestiges of a black communities called Highland Park in Williamsburg, and they have a local community association there. And I'll say this because this is kind of going back to the why, right? The way we do it on city council is we're policymakers, right? And you have city staff that go out there and do the implementation. That's exactly right, and that's how it should be done. But I wanted to do things a little bit differently. So when I decided to run, I always kind of envisioned myself sitting on that dais saying, what can I do differently? And not like completely like earth-shattering different, but what can I do a little bit differently than what I'm seeing right now? What kind of change, small or big, can I do? So when I was at Highland Park and it was my turn to speak, I said something that I'll pledge to do is, I know that city staff goes out there, but when was the last time you saw a city council member knocking on your doors on non-election years, by the way, to make sure that your community is doing okay? And this is for every neighborhood, but especially there, because I knew that incumbent council members hadn't been there. And when I got done, and I love him to death, Paul Friley, my dear friend who was the mayor, he and I served together and no longer is on council, but he was the vice mayor at the time, and we were on the same slate running for re-election. He said, well, I think we've done a lot of things. And the lady was like, who are you again? Not sassy or anything. She's like, I haven't heard of you before. And that was, I think, validating the point. I'll share a really funny moment real quickly. Before I did my newspaper endorsement with the Daily Press or with the Virginia Gazette, whatever, WY Daily, Seth and I, who was my fraternity brother and my best friend, obviously campaign manager, we would watch Kevin Hart videos, maybe about 30 minutes before we would go in, just thought, lighten up the mood and kind of get me a little bit loose. And those are just kind of the fond memories to always remember. So.
That's great. If no others, I have one final question, but if there's anything, Brianna, Caleb, if not, I'll move to the final question.
I can quickly jump in. Well, I've been trying to kind of rack my brain for those big moments. It was great to be with the team after the win. It was obviously the night of was really nice. I think little things really uplift you too. And if you're on the panel wondering, can I do this? Should I do this? You'd be surprised how much people are willing to give you their time to help you out. I was probably 2 days away from the election, not eating very much, just working from wake to asleep. And my neighbors came over at one point and they gave me some carrot cake and they just said, we made this for you. We know you've been working hard. And so we want to give this to you. And that was just really uplifting that people think about you that way. So I guess that was a real positive, recognizing that even though we were having to be so distant, people still look out for you. And that'll be the same if you were on the panel or if you were one of the attendees listening, wondering if you can do it too. People do have your back.
Can I share one funny Caleb story, if that's okay?
You have 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Oh, that's all I need. Caleb, during the middle of the campaign, my wife and I had just declared I wasn't running for reelection. My wife and I were just strolling through Colonial Williamsburg. Caleb comes through the bike. He's probably had tons of caffeination. He was so jittery. I've never seen him so jittery in ever. And he's just like, hey, what's up, guys? I'm doing great. I'm just making calls right now. I'll see you guys later. I gotta run. It was so funny. I mean, thanks for letting me have that moment.
That's perfect. And so
Thanks for sharing that moment, Benny.
final question, and if you keep this under a minute so we can wrap up before 7. You know, William Mary, as you know, is known as the mother of presidents. We have a long tradition of public service, elected or otherwise. In your role in public service, how can you be a steward for William Mary in that long tradition? And I don't want to call anybody, so who's willing to step up, and not everyone has to respond there. The last thing people will remember.
So I can hop in.
Yes.
Jay, so we can save someone who will say things more eloquently than me after me. I remember helping out with William Mary creating its new mission statement. It was something like convening minds for meeting challenges today and tomorrow. That's the new one. It was established just a couple of years ago. And I think, that's what good public service is. You are working with people in your community. You're trying to bridge gaps. And as you can, if you're trying to be a good steward of the public trust, you're trying to listen to people and then, after hearing them out, recognize that there are things that you can work towards that can really uplift others who maybe don't have the opportunity that you do in the seat that you're in.
Thank you.
I think the reason why I was sold on William Mary and the reason why I ended up attending is because it's told as a story. When you go off and you first have the chance to speak with prospective students and go on that tour, the entire process just feels like a story. And I think that when I was at the college, I felt like I was a part of that continuation. And I really do view this bit of public service as a continuation, not only of my story, but the story of the college and the way that's influenced each of us in our respective way. So I really do view it as such.
Thanks, Brianna.
I'll be quick. We are, I think, on this very long arc of history, right? And we're just but specks of that. And it's never lost on me that, I serve in a body with people who come from all over the state, and historically people who didn't look like me weren't there. But William and Mary prepared me to be there. And, we have that in us. And it's really important for all of us to remember that, stewards is a big deal, because I was on the honor council. I remember, having folks come into the Wren building and Wren Chapel and do the honor pledge, and, all of that sort of taken together, sort of sticks with you. And, we have an incredible sort of burden because we've been to one of the best places to go to school in the country. And I think we have this incredible opportunity to give back to people and to never forget that. And I think that's what we can take with us. And Benny said it earlier, I think, is that service takes so many different forms. It could be elected office. It could be as a government employee. It could be with a nonprofit. No matter how you serve, just remember that you have an incumbent duty to give back to those who have less and those who come behind you.
Thank you. Benny, I think you're last.
Well, in the sense, I think my William Mary education never stopped after getting elected on city council. I'm interacting with William Mary as a stakeholder, not as my educational institution, my undergrad or my law school. But it's striking because when I got sworn in, I wouldn't fit in there at that time period, right? And yet at the same time, this was happening. And I think in a sense, Catherine Rowe, our president, had put it best. You have to look to the past in order to know what we need to do to change, to advance, to progress in the future. And that's always stuck with me. And maybe that's just because we live in a town that's been here prior to this country's founding. But William and Mary will always have that, the public service mindset will always be, I think, inherently all part of us.
Thank you. Thank you, Benny, Caleb, Brianna, Jay. Thank you for putting yourselves out there. It's so important, and you've represented William Mary and are representing William Mary so well. I do want to, on behalf of the Alumni Association, the DC chapter, Catherine, and others, we do appreciate those participating tonight and sending us some questions. With that, we are done for the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Take care, everyone.